This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
An orchestrated coup attempt leaves at least 3 senior government officials dead in Ethiopia. Vote counting underway in Mauritania after an historic vote. And Sudanese protesters accept Ethiopia's proposal for a political transition. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, South Africa's steel exports suffer amid lower US demand. And in sport, Nigeria get lucky against Burundi in their Africa Cup of Nations opener. In our top story this hour, Ethiopia's Army Chief of Staff has been shot dead in the capital Addis Ababa. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says he was shot while trying to thwart an attempted coup on the Amhara regional government on Saturday. In Amhara itself, the regional governor, Ambechu Mekonnen, was killed alongside an advisor. The Prime Minister has denounced the attacks.
Some are dead and others are wounded. The crisis we are seeing in Amhara region is effectively a coup attempt, which was led by a very high-ranking military official and other military personnel.
We are still awaiting more information on those responsible for the attack. But of course, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took power last year and has since tried to spearhead political reforms in the country. He's previously released political prisoners, removed bans on political parties, and prosecuted officials accused of gross human rights abuses. Although, despite all of this, his government continues to battle mounting violence. Well, let's get to the very latest on these events in Ethiopia. We're joined on the line by CGTN's Girum Chala with us from Addis. Girum, a very dramatic Saturday evening in both Addis and the Amhara district. Just tell us what we know so far about these attacks.
Well, Lindy, as you have expanded on your intro, the attack took place on Saturday night around the 6 o'clock at night and went on all the way to 7 o'clock, and it has started in the Amhara regional state, which is about 800 kilometers away from it. That is the capital, Bahada itself. And the attack is said to be organized by the security office head of that region itself. And because of the attack, 2 of the leaders, one of them is the president of the regional state, were killed, and it was said that it was indeed a coup attempt in the regional state itself. And one of the saddest stories as well is the death of the chief of staff of the Ethiopian Army, General Soweto Mekonnen himself, and another general with him who were, of course, trying to mitigate the problem and the danger of coup d'etat in Bahada from Addis Ababa, and they were said to be shot and were killed because of the incident last night. So the situation in general terms is this one, Lindy, and we're waiting the government to give us more information on this.
Girum, we are struggling to hear you there, so I hope you can hear me clearly. We understand that at the moment the internet is down in Ethiopia. Is this related to the coup attempt, and what is the general mood, the general atmosphere in the country today?
Well, Lindy, yes, indeed, the internet is down. Both data and Wi-Fi services are down. It looks like it's a complete nationwide blackout. And even in international organizations, it does not really work. And we understand from the trends that it is related with the security situation of the country until they curb the problem, the danger itself posed. They wanted to perhaps shut down this internet service, and that's what we are hearing from some authorities. At the same time, across the country, to be honest, the mood is calm, and we are not hearing any reports of gunfire or such sort across the country. There's no such report. Even in Bahada, where this dangerous event started, the situation now is calm. We've been hearing from people from there at the same time. And regional authorities from across the country are giving out messages of condolences for those who've been deceased because of this incident. And the Prime Minister has also addressed the nation somehow, and he was telling the nation that everyone should be on alert, and him and his government are trying to control the situation 100%. We have heard, by the way, the arrests were made, and according to the government, most of the people who attempted this coup were put in custody, and some others are also being chased so that they will be put under arrest. This is what we know, Lindy.
And Girum, what do the events of Saturday night essentially mean for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's rule? Of course, this is not the first time something similar has happened. Of course, in October last year, there were soldiers who marched to his office. He claimed at the time that they'd wanted to kill him. Despite all these reforms that he's spearheaded, it seems there is still a lot of resistance to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and his government.
Well, indeed, Lindy, since this reformist prime minister came to power, things were not really walking in the park. He's been challenged several times, and killings were here and there. Ethnic-based violence were also here and there. And at once, Ethiopia also had become the largest IDP in number host nation, that's internally displaced people host nation, because of these insecurities across the country. On the positive note, the Prime Minister has introduced lots of reforms, including the democratization of the country, releasing prisoners, as we've been saying earlier, and also trying to open up the economy itself. And that has actually generated him a lot of support from not only within the country, but from the international community. And Ethiopia's economy is relatively doing fine compared to the fragile situation, the security situation of the country. Investment is also in a good shape. But as you've said, this has lots of implications for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government. If you recall, exactly 1 year from now, today, the attack at Moscow Square, when his supporters were rallying, 4+ million of them, another killing attempt was made against him directly. And right after that, situations were complicated in the country. Now, exactly 1 year after, the same, almost the same incident has happened, but somewhere else in the country. So this has a lot of meaning, according to the people we've spoken to in the security sector and others. They say Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed needs to change his strategy when it comes to securing the country, and also he needs to work around the clock to curb the social, economic, also political problems that are being seen across the country. So we shall see what they are going to do about it, but this really has a strong message for the Prime Minister himself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Girum Chala, joining us there on the line from Addis Ababa, of course, confirming that 3 senior government officials were killed in that attempted coup, and that, of course, has been strongly condemned by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Now let's go to news from Mauritania, where vote counting is currently underway. Presidential candidates from the country's opposition parties are, however, calling for transparency in the electoral process. Mauritania went to the ballot on Saturday in elections that will see the first peaceful transfer of power since independence. CGTN's Jane Coup has more details.
This election is the first in Mauritania's history since the country gained its independence from France in 1960. And as the counting of the ballots continues, opposition parties hope that the outcome will be free and fair.
We continue to hope, and we are working to participate in these elections, and we wish for them to be transparent, honest, and they are not sullied by vice.
Civil society organizations have expressed satisfaction with the process so far.
Compared to the information we received both in Nouakchott and across the country, because we cover all 15 regions, everything went well overall. Anyway, as we speak, because we are at the halfway point, it's around noon. In any case, we have not yet been informed of any deviation from what was planned.
Security has been a point of concern for the country. While Mauritania has been spared attacks by jihadist militants linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State that have devastated other countries in the West Africa Sahel region, the country remains vigilant.
I think there are no longer any attacks against foreigners in Mauritania because of the pact President Aziz made with the terrorists. The pact gives a free hand to the terrorism ideologues in Mauritania to make their own laws.
President Mohamed Ould Abdel Aziz is stepping down at the end of his mandate. The end of his tenure has allowed the country to hold its first democratic handover of power since independence. If no candidate receives more than 50% of the vote, the election will go to a second round next month. Jin Kyo, CGTN.
Sudanese protest leaders say they've accepted the creation of a civilian majority governing body for a political transition as proposed by an Ethiopian envoy. The compromise blueprint suggests the creation of a 15-member governing body comprised of 8 civilians and 7 members of the military. And the ruling military council has yet to give its vote on the Ethiopian proposal.
We accepted the proposal that was presented by the mediator, which covers all the bases of the transition period and the need to establish an acceptable and adequate atmosphere to restart the political process.
Sudan has been racked by tensions between protesters and generals. The situation was exacerbated on June 3rd after a massive crackdown on demonstrators in Khartoum. On Saturday, a group of young protesters took to the streets in the city of Omdurman. They say they'll keep demonstrating until justice is served for those who were killed in that crackdown by the military. Witnesses say protests set tires on fire in some streets in the city. To Libya now. Forces allied with the UN-backed government say they're preparing an airport west of the capital. The airport has been one of the main scenes of fighting between the two sides since Eastern Libyan commander Khalifa Haftar launched an offensive on Tripoli in early April. Haftar and his backers say they are trying to free the capital from militia who they blame for destabilizing Libya since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The United Nations says the campaign on Tripoli has left at least 653 people dead and has displaced more than 93,000.
Since the early hours of the morning, we advanced from 3 different locations around the airport perimeter, and we are currently awaiting instructions from our noble leaders to advance and capture the whole airport.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, President Donald Trump says he will impose more sanctions on Tehran on Monday. And former Al-Shabaab fighters complete a rehabilitation program in Mogadishu. With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
In the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
From Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice. The United States is stepping up economic pressure on Iran. President Donald Trump says he will impose more sanctions on Tehran on Monday and says military action is still possible. The comments come a day after the American president said he'd called off a strike against Tehran in retaliation for the downing of a U.S. drone. CGTN's Toby Muse has more.
On Saturday, US President Donald Trump tweeted that he will impose what he described as major additional economic sanctions on Iran Monday. Earlier in the day, he explained to reporters his decision not to fire on an Iranian aircraft after that country shot down an American drone.
I didn't like the idea of them knowingly shooting down an unmanned drone and then we kill 150 people. I didn't like that.
It comes in the wake of increased tensions across the region. The US and its allies accuse Iran of attacking oil tankers last month, causing tens of millions of damage in the Strait of Hormuz. Meantime, British Foreign Office Minister Andrew Morrison will travel to Iran on Sunday for talks. He is expected to call for an urgent de-escalation in the region and raise UK and international concerns on Tehran's conduct. For its part, Iran has summoned the United Arab Emirates' top envoy in Tehran to protest their policy of allowing the US to launch drones from their territory. Now, Trump pulled out of the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran last year, a pact opposed by the US's regional allies Saudi Arabia and Israel. Yet, Trump seemed to offer the prospect of another deal with Iran.
We're not going to have Iran have a nuclear weapon. And when they agree to that, they are going to have a wealthy country. They're going to be so happy, and I'm going to be their best friend. I hope that happens. I hope that happens, but it may not.
Iran is saying that if the US violates its borders, it will shoot down any drone again. A foreign ministry spokesman told the Iranian news agent Tasnim, regardless of any decision they make, we will not allow any of Iran's borders to be violated. Iran will firmly confront any aggression or threat by America. These sentiments seem to be echoed among Iranians on the streets of that country.
No matter how bad the economic situation gets, the pride and attachment we have to our nation are intact.
Toby Muse, CGTN, Washington.
Now, the U.S. has been using economic pressure and sanctions to force Iran into renegotiating the 2015 nuclear deal. But the question is, how effective has that strategy been?
U.S. sanctions have severely affected Iran's oil-dominated economy. Between 2012 and 2016, Iran was estimated to lose out on around $150 billion US. Then, in 2015, Iran signed the nuclear deal, which allowed it to start trading internationally again. But President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the accord last year. The reinstatement of U.S. sanctions, particularly on energy, shipping, and financial sectors, hit oil exports and caused foreign investment to dry up. By March this year, Iran's oil exports had fallen to 1.1 million barrels per day on average, even lower than the amount during the Iran-Iraq War. And President Trump declared that he intended to bring Iran's oil exports to zero. In May, 6 months of exemptions from U.S. sanctions for countries still buying oil from Iran ended. Furthermore, the U.S. has blocked payments for the country's oil exports. Money for oil purchases is frozen in the importer's account and can't be transferred to Iran. The local currency has lost its value dramatically since the U.S. pulled out of the Iran deal, and Tehran has been using barter trade to deal with the challenge. But how far can the country's economy go? Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
Turning to other news now, South Africa commemorated World Refugee Day in Johannesburg with a concert. An array of iconic South African artists came together to send a message of unity, brotherhood and integration. All proceeds go directly to supporting refugees in the country. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
According to the United Nations, more than 70 million people around the world have been displaced due to war, conflict and persecution. Africa has over 6 million refugees, and South Africa is home to more than 1 million asylum seekers.
A concert for refugees hopes to raise awareness on the plight of those who fled searching for safety and a better life.
The numbers are not telling the real stories and challenges and the pains of these people. And we thought maybe it's a little effort from our side, but we want to create a kind of awareness. If you see the lineup, I mean, so there are very prominent musicians. They're coming from different backgrounds musically. I think itself, bringing these artists together is a kind of message of unity and peace.
Multi-instrumentalist Pops Mohammed and Buscade Soweto String Ensemble were some of the stars on stage.
You know, we've got over 68.5 million refugees displaced around the world. And I mean, one is already one too many. And we have to try to find ways to how can we eradicate that. And music is one of the most powerful tools to address social issues like this. And I think that's one of the reasons why I want to be part of it.
I think that what is really important for these young people is that they realize that they're part of a global community. They don't just live in isolation in Soweto, difficult as it is to live in Soweto, but they all have the possibility of a passport, they all have a home, they all have an identity, they all have families. I don't think there's enough awareness of sort of world politics that this is brought home to them at an event like this.
The music was accompanied by a photographic and video exhibition of refugee stories.
There are visuals that are going to bring home the difficulties and the pain and the horror of where people come from, but also there are stories of hope and there's amazing music. And I think hearts will ignite, that's for sure, but also the joy of being together and enjoying a lovely, lovely concert like this.
For one night, South African audiences took a small step with refugees and listened carefully to their stories of persecution and terror through the power of music. Julie Shah, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's go to Somalia now, where 126 former Al-Shabaab fighters have graduated from a disarmament, demobilization and reintegration center. It's all part of efforts to rehabilitate militants who had defected.
In Badoa, Somali graduates prepare for their diplomas. The graduates are former Al-Shabaab fighters who have completed an intensive rehabilitation program.
Today it was a graduation ceremony, the fifth graduation ceremony, whereby 126 disengaged combatants graduated today. So it is very important. They have went through various vocational trainings in the rehabilitation process.
While in the center, former fighters are trained in electricity, masonry, tailoring, and welding. The training, in addition to therapy, looks to reintegrate them back into their communities.
This kind of program will help, many defections, since, Al-Shabaab cannot be fought with a military operation all the time. So this method, I think, is the best method. And hopefully the graduates will help, will reintegrate back to the community, as well as they will become a constructive society in the community.
Disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration programs are also operating in Mogadishu, Beledweyne, and Kismayo. Astatar, CGTN.
Staying in Somalia, where night entertainment is back in the capital Mogadishu for the first time in decades. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billow attended a live music event in the capital and reports on how young people are taking advantage of the newfound stability.
Shortly after sundown, young people gather to share food and drinks at these popular restaurants in Mogadishu, as recent stability has seen an increase in the number of privately owned businesses like Pizza House that has become increasingly popular among young people. Musicians and upcoming artists also entertain patrons at least once a week at these live music sessions, reminiscing the good old days with songs from the past. In recent months, entertainment spots like these have become a major attraction in a capital often a scene of deadly confrontation between government forces and insurgents. Young people are, however, determined to change this by reclaiming Mogadishu's lost glory through the revival of arts and music.
Night entertainment has changed a lot. Before, people remained indoors because of fear and uncertainty. Somalia has turned over a new leaf. Personally, I wasn't born or brought up here, but I moved here and enjoy the newfound peace with my fellow countrymen and women.
Born in Yemen, Mona Miski and her family recently relocated to Somalia as conflict rages on in the Arab country. Back in Somalia, a country she barely knows, the young female artist has made it a personal mission to revive musical memories. Locals also have a chance to take part in a karaoke session as part of entertainment aimed at increasing unity and integration among young people. When the sun sets, this city takes on another life, with various hotels providing live music entertainment for their audience. Artists mostly play old school music from the past.
Many people prefer traditional instruments. Old school music is played in a cool and slow tempo way. Unlike modern music, it also reminds people of the good old days.
Abbas Mohammed is an upcoming artist and performer classic hit from the early 70s. He says young people need sports like this to showcase their skills.
Modern music has lost taste in the recent years. However, old music has good taste and carries powerful messages. Places like this encourage upcoming artists and love for the old generation music. It can also help the young people learn and appreciate their culture.
And with the absence of a national theatre, restaurants and hotels continue to provide venues that revive the country's musical culture. Meanwhile, the government is now renovating major landmarks, including the theatre in Mogadishu, through a national recovery plan. Once completed, Mona and her band hope to entertain fans there. Abdul Aziz Bilon, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Now here in East Africa, every year from late July to August, tourists travel to the Masai Mara in Kenya and the Serengeti in Tanzania to witness the Wildebeest Migration. The phenomenon, which has been described as one of the 7 modern wonders of the world, involves mainly wildebeests and zebra crossing from the Serengeti National Park into Kenya in an age-old cycle. CGTN's Wakistia Nyabwa has more.
The Masai Mara is breathtaking in the rainy season. The grass is green and lush. Predators and prey alike prowl the fields of green. On the land and in the rivers, the animals revel in the weather. They are playful and indifferent to the stares of tourists who throng the Masai Mara. It is a beautiful time. And at the heart of it all is one of the 7 modern wonders of the world, the Wildebeest Migration from Tanzania's Serengeti National Park into Kenya's Masai Mara. There's a certain organization to the way in which the wildebeest migration occurs. First come the zebras. The wildebeest will follow the very same route across the river and into the Mara. It is a cycle as old as time. Every year, between June and October, over 1.5 million wildebeest, gazelles and zebras instinctively set off from Tanzania.
It's during the dry season, when there is no rainfall in the Serengeti National Reserve, they come here looking for greener pasture.
They find it across the Mara River on the Kenyan side, if they make it there. Crocodiles, lions, leopards and hyenas lie in wait, and these predators kill around 300,000 wildebeest every year. Others drown in the Mara River. The wildebeest which survive and make it to the Masai Mara must ensure the survival of their species.
This tends to be a mating, let me use that word, a mating ground for the wildebeest. They come here for mating and go back to Serengeti to give birth and raise their calves. So that has been the cycle, but mostly they come here in the month of August, stay on a good year, stay up to around early November or end of October, then go back to Tanzania.
The wildebeest know it's time to leave when the end of the year approaches and the grass on the Kenyan side dries up. Then they start their journey back across the river to Ngorongoro in Tanzania, where they will give birth to the calves they conceived. When the young ones have found their feet and the grass dries up on the Tanzanian side, the wildebeest will cross back into Kenya with their young in another spectacular migration, and the annual cycle will continue. Wilkisa Nyabwa, CGTN, in the Masai Mara, Kenya.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. South Africa's steel exporters suffer amid lower US demand. And Burkina Faso hopes for more cooperation with China as Beijing prepares for a meeting to discuss the goals of the 2018 FOCAC summit.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In your business news, the South African economy is still lagging behind. The latest data points to a 3.2% contraction in the first quarter of 2019. This follows growth of 1.4% in the last quarter of 2018, and it is the worst drop since 2009. The steel and aluminium sector has not escaped unscathed, but as Angela Coppola explains, it's not all doom and gloom.
The South African steel and aluminium sectors have increased their export volumes and revenues between 2018 and 2019. It's good news, and it's due to some extent to AGOA.
About $54 million worth of goods were exported in the first quarter of last year, compared to about $89 million worth of goods this year around. So that sort of shows us that companies in the sector basically benefited from the comparatively weaker exchange rate, and also they benefited from exports under AGOA, and also the various exclusions that were granted for companies within the sector that exports to the US.
The latest data doesn't take the most recent changes into consideration, specifically in terms of the US market.
The data that has been released in terms of exports to the US is historic in terms of the first quarter, the first 3 months of the year. So the US lifted those tariffs recently in the last months or so it will not reflect as yet. But the reports from the employers and from the companies are that their orders are drying up. Now, I suspect that those that will reflect within the next quarter or the quarter after that in the statistics.
That's not the only concern. Those two sectors are facing margin squeeze due to increased cost pressures locally.
It's largely as a result of high and volatile input costs that has an impact on the production processes. Obviously, rising fuel costs and energy costs that have increased recently also has an impact on the production processes of companies.
Industry players are calling for drastic action.
I think the president needs to look at this holistically and look what should be done to, first of all, make sure the industry survives. Secondly, we can maybe look at growth later on.
The steel and aluminium sectors in South Africa are in crisis, and the situation in the US with that removal of those tariffs for Mexico and Canada isn't helping matters. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Sasolburg, South Africa.
The Embassy of the People's Republic of China in Burkina Faso has held a press conference in Mogadishu on China-Africa relations. The embassy briefed the press on the upcoming meeting of coordinators for the implementation of pledges made last year at the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit. Chinese President Xi Jinping committed $60 billion to Africa in the form of grants, loans and special funds. And a further $10 billion is expected to be invested by Chinese companies in Africa through 2021.
I think during the summit in September 2018, a lot of achievements were made, not only in infrastructure, but also in the area of peace and security. The trade volume between China and Africa had already increased by 20%, compared now with the previous years, where the trade volume reached $204 billion. But now an increasing number of Chinese companies are expressing an interest in setting up in Africa.
I think that the Chinese vision is relevant for the fact it is a win-win cooperation. It is not just a matter of coming, give assistance and leave, but it is about building a future together. China has a lot to give to Africa in terms of value, more especially discipline, which in reality is the engine of nation building.
Meanwhile, in Ethiopia, China's trade partnership with Africa continues to grow. Flowers from Ethiopia are now making their way into the Chinese market. Astatal follows how the perfect rose finds its way from Ethiopia all the way to China.
With an average annual temperature of 16 degrees Celsius, Ethiopia has a perfect climate for growing flowers. The country is currently Africa's second largest flower exporter. The flowers grown here are largely sold in Europe and the US, but China has also grown as a considerable market. Zhang Wenda came to Ethiopia 5 years ago to work in the flower trade. Here he found a variety of roses popular with the Chinese market. The flowers are packed and transported to Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, before landing in China.
Ethiopia has developed a very comprehensive floral industry covering planting, packaging, and cold chain transportation.
Ethiopia is the world's fourth largest exporter of flowers, with China-Africa trade routes continuing to expand. Astatal, CGTN.
Tunisia is hosting this year's ITC Africa Exhibition. It aims to highlight how Tunisia is as an open portal on Africa and emphasize the country's capacities in the digital field. CGTN's Edna Chouachi explains how the North African country is leveraging on this exhibition.
The Crum Exhibition Park in Tunis has hosted the International Trade Fair for Information and Communication Technologies, CGTN Africa 2019. The fair has gathered over 200 African public and private decision makers in the ICT field.
This is the right place for African ICT competencies and companies to sign agreements and boost their cooperation within Africa. More than 10,000 professionals gather in Tunis. Over 1,000 B2B meetings will be held in the 3-day event.
This international event was opened by Minister of Communication Technologies and Digital Economy and several African ministers, as well as the Vice President of Huawei Corporation. This new edition aims to strengthen triangular partnership in ICT between Tunisia, Western countries and Africa.
Nowadays, the digital market is unlimited. Solutions which are useful in Tunisia could also be useful to any African nation or any country in the world. CGTN Africa is a platform for exchange and private-private partnership to export ICT solutions abroad and to import solutions from our African and international partners.
The second edition of the International Forum eHealth in Africa, Transform Digital Economic Health, was organized on the sidelines of CGTN Africa. Several African companies have presented innovative solutions.
The e-Gabon project cost $57 million. It's divided into two components. Firstly, we've put in place a national health information system. Secondly, we've created a system to develop an innovative digital system to bring the population closer to the administration related to the health sector and the digital economy.
Tunisian authorities and the Agency for the Promotion of Industry and Innovation in Tunisia aim to transform the North African state into a digital economy and ICT pole in the continent. According to many international ICT experts, CGTN Africa 2019 is a true international platform of business in the digital world. The event has given hundreds of businessmen, enterprises, and state officials the opportunity to know the Tunisian, African, and Western offer in information and communication technologies. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, staying with tech, South Africa is facing a severe shortage of developers. This has left major sectors such as financial institutions struggling to recruit employees with critical computer skills. A small alternative academy in Johannesburg is working to change that. CGTN's Alexandria Majala reports.
In South Africa's We Think Code Academy, there are no teachers or classes, and students don't need to have any prior experience or qualifications to enroll. The Johannesburg-based schools program focuses on peer-to-peer learning for students to learn how to develop websites, programs and apps.
A program like We Think Code democratizes the opportunity by saying it doesn't matter what your prior educational background is, it doesn't matter what your prior social background is, you could be born to code, and here's an opportunity to include you in the economics of technology.
Students are selected through an intensive boot camp that sees only the top 1% with quantitative skills admitted to the school. The academy, started in 2015, offers an intensive 2-year program for the students. South Africa is facing a severe shortage of computer skills, leaving major sectors such as financial institutions struggling to recruit employees with critical skills.
Our universities are doing a great job of delivering technical skills that are desperately needed within the business space. The reality is that they can't keep up with the demand, and the university channel focuses on a very specific type of high school education, which then feeds into what they do.
Unemployment in Africa's most advanced economy has remained stubbornly high since white minority rule ended 25 years ago. President Cyril Ramaphosa is on record that youth unemployment in the country has become a national crisis. According to government agency Stats SA, the burden of unemployment is concentrated among the 15 to 34 age group, who account for almost 2/3 of the jobless. We Think Code's program is addressing job creation.
Well, we've seen that if you're able to successfully train one skilled developer, that impact that individual has is on 10 to 15 other individuals in that person's environment, because they're creating employment, they're bringing more efficiency into the workplace, they're creating more profitable businesses, enabling companies to employ even more people.
The program relies purely on donations from its partners, who sponsor students' studies and take them in for 4 months internships once they've completed their studies. Some of the biggest donors are financial institutions, including First National Bank, Standard Bank, and Investec. About 98% of students who've graduated are now employed. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Now, as International Yoga Day commemorations continued around the world, South Africa celebrated the annual event in its own way in the township of Soweto. CGTN's Julie Shire was there.
Hundreds of first-time yogis came looking for inner peace in the middle of once-oppressed Soweto township.
For those that aren't aware, Soweto in our previous dispensation was a what we call a township, or maybe better known to other countries as a ghetto. We had apartheid in the country, which segregated our living circumstances, and to have something like yoga in this environment, raising the vibration, the energy, we can only see more and more positive development starting to take place in townships.
What's really special is that we have found that more and more people from this background are actually looking for alternate ways but don't know how to access it, and so we want to bring it into the township.
Yoga has become increasingly popular in South Africa, but for many here it's still unknown. But they're hoping to discover what this ancient practice does to mind, body and soul.
I think it's really important that, young people, especially in Soweto, get exposed to practice like this, not only to learn more about what's out there in terms of especially taking care of your mental health, because a lot of those things have affected young people in a way that kind of shows itself in our mental health issues, anxiety, depression, because of poverty and things that kind of were the legacy of apartheid and things like that.
They braved the cold, but warm percussion rhythms kept them active and curious about this ancient practice.
I came here to make some exercises so that I can relax my mind and stress.
It's first time for everything, so I decided to try a new thing, yoga. So I never done yoga before, so it's my first time.
It might be a while until Sowetans master downward-facing dogs, cobras and warriors. But their physical, mental and spiritual well-being is resulting in inner peace. Julie Shire, CGTN, Soweto, South Africa.
And here's what's coming up in your sports news up next. Nigeria get lucky against Burundi in their Africa Cup of Nations opener.
The greatest journeys